I'm going to start today's show by trying to irritate a few people in our listening audience because they're not going to be happy with what I'm talking about. Benito was telling me that the news that came in on Friday after the report was released about the Jack Yantis shooting in Adams County, that happened as they were getting off the air, so they didn't have an opportunity to talk about it. I was, of course, away on Friday, and Steve Millington was filling in, and I'd like to thank Steve and Benito for doing the usual bang up job while I was away. But I had some time to look through some of the details on this over the course of the weekend. And here we go again. I know people out there are going to be inflamed about this situation. And I was just doing my little pregame warm up video over at Facebook, and I mentioned this. It's always interesting because you'll see a guy like Michael Brown shot in Ferguson, Missouri, and most of this listening audience would say, "Well, the thug deserved it. He just robbed a cigar store, roughed up the owner of the store. It's on videotape. Went out into the street, and the police officer who responded was battered and bruised because this big hulking guy was punching him, trying to take his gun away. Brown was shot, and therefore justice was served." That's how we look at that. Now, there were a number of witnesses who said otherwise. They said he had his hands up and said, "Don't shoot." But of course, they were witnesses who already had issues with police because they were local dope dealers, and any opportunity they have to take out police, get them fired from their jobs, they'll be looking to do that because they've already got those issues that are set with them. So we never believed that the shooting of Michael Brown was anything but that. Most of us who are on the conservative side of things. Then we had the shooting in South Carolina, and at the time I remember I said, well, let's wait and see what happens because the video is pretty bad. But it's also a very shaky video, although I guess you could lean on the side and say that the police officer in South Carolina, he did shoot a man who was running away, shot the guy in the back, which was well, some people would say it's cowardly. I think more it's about the reaction. It's just that split second that sometimes happens in these situations and people do things, and unfortunately it was not police procedure. That police officer in South Carolina responsible for that is likely going to serve some prison time. So there you go. I mean, we have an answer to that. Then we had the debate on the air here for weeks last February about the shooting of Lavoy Finicum in Oregon. What always got me about that shooting was this: is that my buddy Doug Beatty said to me one day, was chatting with me about that situation, and he said all they had to do was wait till Finicum and the rest of his caravan actually got to the town hall where they were going for their informational meeting, and while they were inside, just let the air out of their tires. And then they couldn't have gone home. They could not have gone back to the Malheur Wildlife Refuge as well. They would have just been looking for a ride, and the FBI would have said, well, come along with us. Instead, the government looked for a confrontation on the open road. Bad idea. However, a disqualifier here as well. Finicum put his hands up in the air when he was told to put his hands up in the air. Then he lowered them. It's on videotape. Well, what do you expect they're going to do? Now, the FBI said all of the shooting came from the troopers and other people who were there at the scene. And yet you did later on discover that one of the agents did indeed fire two shots. That immediately raises a few red flags, and you say to yourself, well, it's tough to believe anything they're telling us at all now because they weren't honest about it in the beginning. But there is actual videotape which shows Finicum lowering his arms. And this is the same man who had said to a reporter, a couple of occasions, in fact, going into this, well, the days leading up to this shooting, that he did not plan to spend the rest of his life locked up in a prison cell, that he would just as soon die. So he made a choice. There you go. And his choice was to do something on the highway that led to his death. Suicide by cop, perhaps, might be a good way to put that. So, Finicum shooting, I would say, despite the lies told by some of the agents from the FBI who happened to be there, Finicum shooting is at least justified because he lowered his arms, and that will, in those situations, often get someone shot. And that is not an unusual act by police officers or law enforcers anywhere in this country. Now, let's get back to Jack Yantis in Adams County. And I was reading in the report from Lawrence Wasden's office, and also the federal government says it's not going to pursue any charges against the deputies as well. Wasden's report mentions that one of the deputies did show up. He was wearing a body camera, but he didn't turn it on. And you know, the conspiracy theorists out there are going to say, aha, he set out that morning to go kill himself, a white rancher, and so therefore, this is part of the cover-up. Well, folks, I had a rant on the air last week, It may have been Wednesday. It may have been Thursday. And that's how memory works, by the way. I don't recall whether it was Wednesday or Thursday, but I had a rant on the air just after 9 o'clock news, which I thought was one of the best on-air rants I've had in a very, very long time. And as soon as I finished it, we went to the break about 20 minutes after 9. I turned to my right where the computer sits that records some of these details. I turned to my right, and wouldn't you know it, I forgot to record it. I had recorded everything in the previous hour, but just before 9 o'clock news, I had stopped the video and saved it because the shorter videos are easier to edit than having to fish through the full 2 hours before you find what you're looking for. And then I got busy with some other issues here in the studio and I forgot to turn it on. So if I do that, then probably there are deputies and police officers out there wearing these cameras who would also forget to turn them on. To call that a conspiracy or part of a conspiracy is a bit of a stretch. We don't know, but I think it's a bit of a stretch. And you'd have to believe that literally these deputies got out of the bed in the morning and thought to themselves, we're going to go out and kill someone today for fun. Well, I sincerely doubt that's how their day actually got started. So, again, he forgot to turn on the camera. Number two, looking through that camera and trying to get any evidence out of it is like looking through a straw. If you were to go to a football game, close one eye and then look through a straw out of the other eye at the action below from the stands, you wouldn't see a whole heck of a lot of what was going on now, would you? You might get one little snapshot, but that's all you're going to get out of that. So right away, I'm going to tell you, these body cameras, they're going to be more of a hassle than they're actually worth because there's going to be a lot of extenuous or extenuating circumstances going on out of the field of vision that you will never see. All right, we've got that part of it down. Now, Yantis' wife, who had been at the scene, as well as his nephew, who was at the scene, both offered testimony as to what happened. Guess what? Their testimony conflicts. All right, if I'm a prosecutor like State Attorney General Lawrence Wasden, then what am I to make of that? I've got two relatives, and they're both telling me one story and then another story, and I can't. In fact, it looks as if the wife, although she suffered a heart attack at the scene, she may have told the people in the wagon as they were taking her to the hospital one story, and then that story may have morphed. And that's not saying she's lying. It's just saying memory works that way with people. So you may even have two stories out of one person. And you've got that going on in this situation. The deputies have two different stories, but they were standing in two different places. So that makes it even more difficult. We also now know that Yantis did fire. He did open fire with his firearm while he was on the road. And apparently, I had thought maybe originally, and we all try to make some assumptions. We have our theories in advance of what may have happened before the findings came out. I'm aware of what these prize bulls will sell for, in excess of $1 million and sometimes much more. Jack Yantis had a very expensive piece of property wounded on that highway. He must have been in terrible, terrible conflict at the time about what he was going to do in this situation. Do I kill it? Do I not kill it? Do I kill it? Do I not kill it? So he was already under a great deal of stress himself, and one of the deputies said they didn't have a problem with Yantis shooting the bull, which he came to do, but that they thought that the direction he was going to shoot put in danger some of the emergency responders who were on the scene after all of this transpired. And they warned him not to do it. Now, when did he fire? Did he fire after he was shot, or did he fire before he was shot? That part of it is all in the mist. We don't know. We simply don't know. And if the investigators can't put all of this together, then what are they to do? I know there are people out there right now who say, well, we know what they're up to, and this is a conspiracy and a cover-up. Well, all of you people who've wandered down off Ruby Ridge and tell me that all of the time, other than, surmising, because you weren't there either. I wasn't there. Other than surmising what you think may have happened because of certain prejudices you hold against law enforcers, you really don't know either. I was looking through some of the comments after the story came out in the Idaho Statesman over the weekend. I was looking through the comments section. I printed some of these up, and there's a list of 7 comments on this page. I'm not surprised by any of them, but again, here you go. You've got people who think everyone out there is out to get them. And how many of you have been pulled over by a law enforcer? I have. But I bet I could list it to one hand. I could count how many times on just one hand. And guess what? I've never had a bad experience. Never. Never. Why is it some people in life never have a bad experience with these things? but other people always seem to have bad experiences. Could it be that you're a little bit snotty when this happens? That you're uncooperative when this happens? I'm bringing this up only because I think it might help, edify us on what actually took place. Here's a guy by the name of Tyson Mendez from San Jose City College. Now, he may be an Idaho resident. That just may be the listing of where he goes to school. He says anyone with half a brain can see the inconsistencies with the deputies' stories. On top of that, their accounts of what happened make no sense. Well, he said so sense. He also used the wrong form of there. Lastly, can anyone explain why the hell they handcuffed his wife? Well, maybe she was being unruly. The deputy stories, he says, are inconsistent, but he ignores the rest of the report that says so are the stories from other witnesses. How convenient to do that. So in other words, he made his judgment a long time ago, so he's going to offer that. And then below that is a guy from Lowell, Massachusetts, who says a lot of them think they can handcuff anyone. She is lucky she didn't get shot too. Really? How do you know that? Again, do you think they got out of bed and they went out and said, we're going to go put some holes in some people today? Here's another one. Cynthia Hamlin, she writes, All Lives Matter, where are you? And then she writes crickets. Well, now that's kind of relates to my point about Black Lives Matter, doesn't it? Here's another one. Trigger-happy, mentally unstable thugs with a badge. They sure give good cops a bad rep. Well, you don't know them again. How do you know that they're not good cops? How do you know that they didn't have stellar records before all of this came down? This doesn't change their records in any way. There's no crime here. No crime that anyone could prove. How can you make that statement? Here's another one. Tina Waters. Blue Lives Matter, she writes. Well, okay, she's actually a black person, too. She's from Atlanta, Georgia. Shows a photograph of her here. And then the writer just below her, a guy by the name of Gene Bivens, says, These two blue lives are at best guilty of manslaughter. Nothing will be done to them, of course. But again, how do you know they're guilty of manslaughter? You weren't there. There are no pictures. And again, the conflicting testimony comes from other witnesses as well. It comes from family members of Mr. Yantis as well. What in blazes, then, do you expect prosecutors to do? Go to the court of public opinion and let you hang them? Because you think that may have happened? My Lord, people, what this comes down to is Mikey Brown, black, badass, Jack Yantis, white, good guy. And I'm a conservative, but I'm telling you that today. A lot of you folks out there, you lead that double standard because you don't like certain people and you're already predisposed to believe they are bad. And Michael Brown was a bad dude. We have the video evidence to back it up and the record from police interactions with him beforehand. But all we can say about the Yantis case, that the only thing we can definitely say at the moment is it was tragic. You can't get anything else out of it. Unless, of course, you've got an axe to grind with someone and you'll never actually buy into any of the report that came from the Attorney General's office. 20 minutes away from 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. More of this ahead. I want to remind you that our telephone number is 736-0300. Also, I want to remind you as well that we only now have, get this, just one locally owned hearing facility in all of southern Idaho. That would be Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert, where Dr. Christine Pickup is working with local folks to improve their hearing issues. Did you know that hearing health and brain health are connected at Mount Harrison Audiology? She's been studying the research on cognitive health and hearing. The most recent findings prove that, when you address hearing losses with hearing aids, the effects of that cognitive decline are greatly diminished. Hearing is critical for communication, for connection to others, and for overall well-being. She goes on to say, now is the time to improve your hearing. You can give her office a call at Mount Harrison Audiology for an appointment. The number is 312-0957. 57, there you go, just 17. Telephones are ringing this morning, and you're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on KLIX.
Yes, Bill, the only thing I kind of disagree with is all these shootings on these officers, that they are trained with the weapons and stuff there, and they hold about 10 to 12 rounds apiece. And being a sportsman area around here, there's a lot of sports people hunting in that there. And I'm just saying, if they have to stand there and empty all their weapons and stuff there, like this person here on this bowl, he was hit 12 times, and there was a total of 21 shots fired, and there was 20 shots from the officers. But where the other 8 shots from the officers go to if the EMS and everything was around there and stuff there?
Well, apparently he didn't go down very fast. And even the nephew, I think, testified to that. Now, as I said, there's some conflicting testimony, memories being what they are, but the nephew testified to that it was not a quick thing where he just dropped dead after one shot.
Yes.
So, a police officer goes out there. I remember touring when I was in the seventh grade. We got a tour of the New York State Police Academy, and they told us that they trained guys to shoot for the head, for instance. And somebody said, "Well, why not shoot to wound?" And the trooper looked at us who was giving the tour, and he said, "Because over there is a list of names on that wall of people who shot to wound, and they ended up getting shot back, and they're dead." So in a situation where someone else is perhaps firing a shotgun at you or a rifle, whatever it happened to be, they were looking, by the way, to make sure that they ended it. And just leaving him wounded on the highway holding the firearm may not have done that. Their job is not to stand there and take one. Their job is to actually come back the next day and police the roads all over again, right?
Yes, I agree with that.
Well, again, we don't know, but there's so much of this that we will never know, I would imagine, because so many people's memories seem to be clouded that night.
Yes, that's true. Now, Terry, because one more and then the next day, then the changes and stuff there on the firearm target practicing and stuff there. If you got, say, a wild game down and you got 20 rounds in your pocket, you don't walk up there, stand there, and fill your meat full of lead and stuff there just to make sure you empty your gun out.
But do you think that they walked over and stood over the top of his dead corpse and emptied their magazines?
Well, 20 rounds fired and stuff there, that being maybe 10 from each officer, 12 rounds, that's a pretty tough person to lay there and get 12 rounds in the person.
But again, you've got guys, two deputies, and they're not standing side by side, so they're both just pulling triggers, right? And the fact of the matter is they may not have, I don't know, they didn't even know how many times they were hitting him. So they missed, obviously, a few times, too, as well. They're looking to bring him down. But that's simply all. And if he did return fire while he was being shot, then they probably did empty a magazine.
Yes.
So, again, why he did not follow instructions when they said, "Don't point that over there, we've got the EMTs working." Why he didn't follow those instructions, who knows? It was dark. I'm sure there was a tremendous amount of confusion going on.
Yeah, and he had, I guess, a little bit of alcohol on him, too, which they probably didn't know at the time, but, it's still a bad situation all the way around.
Sure is. Hey, thank you much for...
Okay, thank you.
Sure, good hearing from you. 736-0300, that's 736-0300 if you'd like to reach our program today. It is, and that's not a free-range area from what I understand out there on the interstate. So you looking at it from a lot of different perspectives, there are a lot of things that went wrong, and they may have been even beyond human control. You say to yourself, how could this escalate to this point? But there's communication, maybe a misunderstanding going on. Maybe somebody didn't hear some instruction. And all of these things obviously play into it. I was in Vermont one time, and I was driving down this highway, saw they had I don't know what they call them now. These road stops, road checks, whatever you call them, where some states these are quite popular, where they just go out, put up a roadblock, and then as you go through, they look for maybe expired inspections and things like that, expired registrations. I came up and I saw a trooper make some hand motions, so I started to speed up. And with that, he started yelling at me, and I stopped, and I rolled down the window, and I leaned down, and I said to him, "I'm sorry, I thought you were waving me through." And I said, "Apologize." And he said, "Oh, okay, no problem." He looked at my tires, he looked at my registration sticker and inspection sticker, and said, "All right, move on." But, if I had decided to drive through there and just keep going without, if he hadn't yelled out, "Whoa, whoa, whoa," could have been a pretty nasty situation. But you know what? I rolled down the window and said, "Hey, I'm sorry." And that was a good way to perhaps diffuse all of that. It's 8:30. Randy Staples will be joining us in about 10 minutes from Idaho Weekly Briefing right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com at 62. On our way perhaps to 95. That shooting that took place in South Carolina, we talked about that at the top of the program, where we're trying to make some comparisons, where the police officer is seen on the videotape shooting the man. As the man runs away, he's shot in the back. And that is, again, that goes back to being tragic because I believe he got pulled over because he had a tail light out. And it's something similar to that. And then it was discovered that there was a warrant out for him because he had missed some child support payments. Now, if everyone had remained calm, what was even more tragic about that story was that both of those men, the police officer and the man who ran and got shot and killed, they had been officers in the Coast Guard. They were both former Coast Guard officers. And if they had stood there for 5 minutes talking, and one of them had actually gotten a ticket or even had to go in on the warrant, I think that they would have developed a rapport. Oh, really? You served where? And that never got to that point because somebody panicked, and then the police officer panicked as well, and it turned out the police officer is likely going to spend quite a few years in a prison cell. But it does show you that in these interactions, and I don't care how much people say, well, you're trained, so you don't do this. I don't care how much training you have. I remember watching a football game years and years and years ago, and the great Jerry Rice was streaking down the field. The quarterback threw this beautiful pass. Rice put out his hands, and he's the greatest football player of all time, not just the greatest receiver in most people's opinion. Put out his hands, and the ball sailed straight through his hands. And you look at that and you say, how did that happen? Well, it happens from time to time. Then no matter how much training he had and how much running he did in the off season and how much time he spent catching bricks as a kid, which gave him the great hands that he had, every once in a while he dropped the ball. And it's going to happen from time to time. 8:35, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're looking finally at a cool off this week. By the middle of the week, we start seeing the temperatures drift below 90 degrees. It's been a while, hasn't it? So that would mean, of course, you've got to start thinking about winter well in advance, and that means making sure your heating unit works now before you have to fire it up, let's say, in November and discover it doesn't. Call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric today. The team at Ramsey's are going to make sure it's done right the first time. Problem-free cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. Telephone number 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. 736-0300, the number to reach our program. That's 736-0300. You're next, and you're on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. I think, human emotion comes into a lot of this stuff. And as tragic as all the shootings have been over the past year, both ways, you've got to admit that majority of the shootings occurred after a tussle. Now, you have put the officer into a defensive mode where he's fending for his life, including the guy that got shot in the back. That was way uncalled for, but what wasn't shown on the videotape was a tussle on the ground. I mean, they were wrestling on the ground before the guy ran away. If that would have never have happened, he probably wouldn't have got the officer's defensive mechanisms up. I mean, it's the same both ways. I mean, in any shooting, somebody's adrenaline gets to a point where it's fight or flight. And when you stand your ground, you don't even know how many times you pull a trigger or anything else. You're just in that mode.
I have had people tell me, well, the police officer was snotty to me and the police officer was rude to me. But if the police officer is, they've got to get this job done. They've got to get it done now. My football coaches were like that with me in high school. They weren't always polite with us, but that was because they had to cut to the chase. I mean, and that's the other thing. The officer, it's not that the officer has a dislike for you or the deputy. It's just that, in some of these situations where things are a little high strung at the moment, and they're telling you, hey, put your hands down or keep them on the dashboard or whatever else, even if you don't like the way the orders are parked, they're just thinking, hey, stop, do this right now. And unfortunately, we don't tend to see that part of it, that they're not there to say, you just might want to keep your hands there because, golly gee, if you don't, I might assume that you're going to reach for a firearm. It's not going to happen that way. It's like boom, boom, boom. Get this done now so that we can all get out of here safely, right?
Well, yeah. No, the other one that nobody understands is, what did he just come from? You're not his only deal that he's done that day.
Right.
Maybe it came from a confrontation just seconds before that was heightened and his adrenaline's still running
Oh, my
or
brother had that
whatever.
happen. My brother, we police officer in our hometown, and we knew him really well, and he was a really nice guy. But he was angry with my brother one night, chewed him out about something, and then the next day he saw my brother on the street, and he said, "I'm sorry." He said, "I just come from booking a guy for drinking and driving, and the guy wanted to fight with me." And he said, and he said I was still keyed up about that. But he said to my brother the next day, "I'm sorry about how I reacted." My brother just said, "Oh, no problem," and that was the end of it.
Yeah, but bottom line is they're the ones trying to enforce the law. If you have a grievance with what is going on, you need to take that up after the fact, not during the case where you may not go home at all.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and I've done it before where I've had a friend that I know I've known for years as a police officer, and as a joke, I kind of sneaked up to his car, tapped him on the shoulder, and said, "Boo." Before I knew it, he had me by the neck in his car. Was it his fault? No, I'm the one. I was the stupid one. I thought it was a joke. But like he explained to me, he says, when I put on this uniform and I'm sitting in this car, I have in high alert of anything.
I got to let you run on that. We've got a hard break coming up, and Randy Staple is next. It's 8:40.